My new boss closed the door behind me, and I felt the lock click before I heard it. She didn't sit. She just stood there, staring at my face like she was looking for something she'd buried a long time ago. Then she asked almost carefully, "Do you remember me?" And the way my stomach dropped told me I probably should. This wasn't random. She knew exactly who I was before I ever walked through that door. Stay with me. The full story unfolds in this video, and the ending rewrites everything you just heard. I stood there, frozen. Her eyes never left mine. Patient, waiting. Like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times and had decided she could afford to be still. I searched her face the way you search an old photograph, looking for something familiar, beneath the years, beneath the polish, beneath the woman standing in a tailored blazer with a company's name embossed on the wall behind her. And then it hit me, not all at once. Slowly. Like a bruise you don't notice until you press against it. The eyes were the same, dark, sharp, and carrying something that had always felt like a verdict. "Sophia," I said. The name left my mouth before I could stop it. The corner of her lips moved. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. "So you do remember," she said softly, and just like that, 20 years collapsed between us like a wall that had always been hollow. I remembered Sophia Harrington the way most people remember a storm. Not the rain itself, but the feeling of standing in it with nowhere to go. We grew up in the same town, attended the same school, but we lived in completely different worlds, and she made sure I never forgot which world was mine. Her family owned half the businesses on the main street. Mine rented a 2-room apartment above a laundromat, and my father worked double shifts just to keep the lights on. I used to wear the same pair of shoes for 2 school years straight. I thought I'd hidden it well. I hadn't. Sophia noticed everything. I remember the afternoon she pointed at my shoes during lunch, in front of everyone, and said with that easy, careless laugh of hers, "Are those the same shoes from last September, Daniel?" The table erupted. I said nothing. I just picked up my tray and walked away, and I promised myself that one day I would walk into a room and no one would ever look at me like I didn't belong. That promise carried me through college, through 2 degrees, through years of working twice as hard as everyone around me just to earn half the credit, and now here I was, standing in her office. "I remembered you the moment I saw your name on the candidate shortlist," she said, breaking the silence. I blinked. "You chose to hire me knowing who I was? I requested you specifically. I didn't know what to do with that. I crossed my arms, not out of confidence, but because I needed something to hold on to." "Why?" I asked. She exhaled slowly, and for just a moment, the composed executive in front of me flickered. Underneath it, I caught a glimpse of something raw, something that had clearly been sitting with her for a long time. "Because I owe you something," she said, "and I've been trying to figure out how to pay it back for years." I let out a short, quiet laugh, the kind that doesn't find anything funny. "Sophia, you can't just hire someone to settle a guilty conscience. I know that." Her jaw tightened slightly. "I'm not trying to buy forgiveness, I just—" She paused, pressing her lips together. "I needed you to know that I remember too, and that I'm not who I was." The room felt smaller suddenly. I looked at her, really looked, and I noticed things I hadn't when I first walked in. The way she was standing wasn't powerful. It was careful. The way someone stands when they're bracing for a door to be slammed in their face. I didn't slam it, but I didn't open it all the way either. "We'll see," I said quietly, and I walked back to my desk, sat down and stared at my screen for a full 10 minutes without reading a single word, because something had just shifted. I just wasn't ready to name it yet. The next 2 weeks were the strangest of my professional life. Sophia and I existed in a careful, unspoken agreement. Professional on the surface. Something else entirely underneath. She would pass my desk in the morning and say something measured and appropriate about deadlines or deliverables. I would respond with equal composure. And then she would walk away, and I would catch myself noticing the slight hesitation in her step, like she always wanted to say one more thing but decided against it. It was exhausting. Honestly, the banter started on a Tuesday. She had called a small team meeting to review the Henderson project. I had prepared thoroughly, color-coded spreadsheets, projected timelines, contingency plans. I laid everything out on the conference table with quiet precision. Sophia looked at the documents, then looked at me. You color-coded the contingency columns, she said. I did, in 3 different shades of blue. Organizational clarity, I said, keeping my voice even. She pressed her lips together, fighting something. You were also this obsessive about your science notes in 7th grade, weren't you? The room went slightly still. A couple of colleagues glanced up. I leaned back slowly in my chair and said, I wouldn't know. I was too busy making sure my shoes were clean enough to avoid public commentary. It landed exactly where I intended. Her smile dropped, just for a second. Then she recovered, composed as ever, and moved on to the next agenda point. But after the meeting, when everyone else had filed out, she stopped beside my chair and said quietly, without looking at me, "That was fair." 2 words. But they carried the weight of 20 years. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. The office had emptied out. I was still at my desk, working through a client proposal that refused to cooperate. The lights had dimmed to their after-hours setting, and the floor was silent except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. I didn't hear her approach. "You're still here," she said from somewhere behind me. I didn't turn around. "So are you." She walked around to the front of my desk and leaned against the edge of it. Something I noticed was very unboss-like, and looked at my screen. "The Morrison proposal," she said. "I worked on that account for 6 months before you arrived. I know. Your notes are in the file, they're good." She glanced at me sideways. "Just good?" "Thorough," I corrected. "Methodical. A little safe." She raised an eyebrow. "Safe. You avoided every creative risk. Every unconventional angle that might have actually made them remember the pitch." She was quiet for a moment. Then, softly, almost to herself, "I've spent a long time playing it safe." I finally looked up at her, and the distance between us, all that carefully maintained professional distance, felt suddenly paper-thin. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're my boss. You can ask me anything. Not as your boss." She met my eyes. "As someone who treated you badly and has thought about it ever since." My hands stilled on the keyboard. "Did it follow you?" she asked. "What I did back then? Did it actually follow you?" The honest answer sat in my chest like a stone. "Every room I walked into for the next 10 years, I said quietly. I walked in expecting someone to find a reason I didn't belong." She said nothing, but her eyes, those same sharp, dark eyes, filled with something I had never once seen in them as a child. Genuine remorse. "I'm sorry, Daniel." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I mean that. Not as a formality. I mean it in the way that keeps you up at night." I believed her. And that terrified me more than anything else. If this story is reaching something in you, something you've carried quietly, stay with me. It's about to go somewhere neither of us expected. Something changed after that Thursday evening, not dramatically. Not in the way you see in films, where suddenly everything is warm light and easy smiles. It was quieter than that, more like a frequency shift, subtle, persistent, impossible to ignore once you noticed it. She started leaving coffee on my desk in the mornings. No note, no explanation. Just a cup, placed precisely beside my keyboard, still warm when I arrived. I never asked about it. She never mentioned it. But it became a ritual that neither of us was willing to break. The late nights became a pattern. It started with the Morrison proposal, which, for the record, I did convince her to make bolder. The client responded with the most enthusiastic feedback the company had received in 2 quarters. She forwarded me the email with exactly 3 words typed above it. "You were right." I stared at those 3 words longer than I should have. That evening she appeared at my desk again, and this time she pulled up a chair instead of leaning against the edge. Something about that small gesture, the decision to sit, to stay, felt significant in a way I couldn't articulate. "The client wants a follow-up presentation," she said, opening her laptop. "I know. I already started the framework." She looked at my screen, then at me. "Of course you did. Is that admiration I hear, Ms. Harrington?" "It's mild professional respect, Mr. Cahill. Don't flatter yourself." But she was smiling, a real one this time. Not the composed executive smile she wore like armor in meetings. This one reached her eyes, and it transformed her face into something I wasn't prepared for. I looked back at my screen before she could notice that I'd noticed. It was during one of those late evenings that she told me about her father. We had been working in comfortable silence for nearly an hour when she closed her laptop and stared at the city lights through the floor-to-ceiling window. People always assumed my childhood was easy, she said. Because of the money. I said nothing. I let her speak. My father measured everything in performance. Grades, appearance, social standing. She paused. Who you sat with at lunch, who you were seen with. She turned from the window and looked at me with an expression that was completely unguarded. I was terrible to people like you, Daniel, because I was taught that distance from struggle meant safety. That if I kept enough space between myself and anyone who reminded me that life could be hard. She stopped. You wouldn't have to be afraid, I finished quietly. She looked at me like I had just said something that had lived in her chest for years without a name. Yes, she whispered. I thought about my father that night on the drive home. I thought about how he used to press my school shirt in the evenings, slowly and carefully, because he wanted me to walk in with my head up, even when everything else felt like it was falling apart. He never once told me the world was fair. He just told me to be excellent anyway. I had spent so long being angry at what Sophia represented that I never considered she might have been a prisoner of it too. That didn't erase the lunch table. It didn't erase the shoes. But it complicated my anger in a way that made it harder to hold on to. And then I noticed him, Marcus Webb, Senior Acquisitions Executive, the kind of man who filled a room with noise and called it presence. I caught him watching Sophia and me through the glass partition of the conference room one evening. Not casually, deliberately. His eyes moved between us with a calculation that had nothing to do with business. Something about it made the back of my neck go cold. I didn't say anything to Sophia, not yet. But I filed it away, because in my experience, when someone watches you that carefully, they're already planning something. Marcus Webb had been with the company for 11 years. I learned this the way you learn most important things in an office. Not from any official source, but from the quiet, careful conversations that happen near the coffee machine when people think no one is really listening. 11 years. 2 promotions that everyone agreed he deserved. A 3rd promotion that everyone agreed he didn't. And a very specific, very personal interest in Sophia Harrington that predated my arrival by at least 3 of those 11 years. I learned that last part from Janet, the administrative coordinator who had seen everything and forgotten nothing. He asked her to dinner twice, Janet told me one afternoon without looking up from her keyboard. She declined both times, very professionally, very finally. She paused. He smiled about it like it didn't bother him, which is always the sign that it bothered him enormously. I thanked her and walked back to my desk, and I thought about the way Marcus had been watching us through that glass partition. It started small. The way most dangerous things do. A misplaced document. My quarterly analysis, the one Sophia had personally praised in a department meeting, disappeared from the shared server and reappeared with several key figures altered. Not enough to be immediately obvious. Just enough to make the conclusions look careless. Look amateur. Sophia called me into her office about it. Her expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in the way she held her pen. The board reviewed the Henderson projections this morning, she said. There are inconsistencies. I know, I said, because I've seen the current version, and it isn't what I submitted. She looked at me steadily. That's a serious thing to say, Daniel. I know that too. I placed my laptop on her desk and opened my local backup. The original file, time-stamped unaltered. She studied it in silence for a long moment when she looked up. Her expression had shifted. The neutrality was gone, replaced by something sharper. Someone accessed the server, she said quietly. Someone with senior-level clearance, I replied. We both knew there weren't many people that list included. The rumors followed within days. I heard them the way you hear distant thunder. Before you can see any clouds, before you can be certain it isn't just traffic or construction. But the vibration is unmistakable. That Daniel Cahill had a personal relationship with the CEO. That his work was being graded on a different scale. That he had been hired not for his qualifications, but for reasons that had nothing to do with professional merit. The words moved through the office like smoke, shapeless, everywhere, impossible to grab. I watched colleagues who had been warm and collegial suddenly become measured in their responses. Careful, a half step removed. The kind of distance people create when they're deciding which side of something they want to be on. The board meeting was on a Friday morning. I wasn't in the room. But I knew it was happening because Sophia had been in back-to-back calls since 7 a.m., and her assistant had rescheduled every other appointment without explanation. Marcus Webb walked past my desk that morning with a coffee cup and an expression of absolute calm. He stopped. "How are you settling in, Daniel?" he asked pleasantly. "Very well, thank you." He nodded slowly, like he was considering something. "It's a good company, built on reputation, on trust." He smiled, the same smile Janet had described, the one that didn't reach anywhere real. Those things take years to build and very little time to damage. He walked away before I could respond, and I sat there with my hands flat on my desk, pressing them down to keep them steady. That afternoon, Sophia's assistant delivered a single printed memo to my desk. It was a formal notice. Pending a board review of conduct and conflict of interest allegations, I was to have no direct communication with the CEO outside of official, documented channels. Effective immediately. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in my drawer, and stared at the wall, because somewhere in that building, Marcus Webb was sitting comfortably, and Sophia was sitting alone, and the distance he had manufactured between us felt exactly like the distance I had spent my entire life trying to close. Don't go anywhere. What happens next? I almost didn't survive it. I submitted my resignation on a Monday morning. Not because I was defeated. I want to be clear about that. I submitted it because I had spent enough of my life watching powerful systems grind quietly against people who couldn't afford to fight back, and I refused to become the instrument that damaged someone else in the process. Sophia had built something real. Her reputation, her leadership, the trust of a board that had taken years to earn. I was not going to let my presence become the crack that Marcus Webb used to bring any of it down. I typed the letter carefully, no bitterness, no accusation, just clean, professional language that said I was grateful for the opportunity and wished the company continued success. It was the hardest thing I had written since my father's eulogy. Left the letter with her assistant and went back to my desk to pack the few things I had brought with me: a notebook, a framed photograph of my father, a small, unremarkable plant that I had carried from every office I had ever worked in, because he once told me that anything worth keeping needs tending. I was wrapping the plant in newspaper when I heard the door. Not a knock. Just the door opening. And then the particular quality of silence that follows when someone is trying to hold themselves together and not quite succeeding. I turned around. Sophia was standing in the doorway of the open office, the resignation letter open in her hand. The composed executive was gone, completely. What stood in her place was a woman whose eyes were red at the edges and whose breath was coming just slightly too fast. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think it's the right thing. For who? For you, for the company." She stepped forward and her voice dropped, low, controlled, but only barely. "Don't do that. Don't make a noble decision on my behalf without asking me what I want." I set down the newspaper. "Sophia, no." She pressed the resignation letter against her chest, almost like she was keeping it from me. "I have sat across from that board. I have smiled through 11 years of Marcus Webb filling rooms with noise and mistaking it for substance. I have made every careful, correct, approved decision this company required of me." Her voice fractured slightly on the last word. "And the one time, something in my life has felt honest. You're wrapping it in newspaper and walking out the door." The room was very quiet. "Something honest," I repeated slowly. She met my eyes without flinching. "You make me feel like I don't have to perform. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" I looked at her, this woman who had once made me feel invisible, now standing in an open doorway making herself completely visible, and something in my chest that had been braced for years began, very slowly, to release. "I bullied you," she said quietly. I was cruel and careless, and I weaponized the one advantage I had, because I was a frightened child who didn't know what else to do, and I have carried that with me every single day. She exhaled. "I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm asking you not to leave before we find out what this is." My throat tightened. "What do you think this is?" I asked. She looked at me for a long moment, searching, open, unguarded in a way I had never seen from her before. "I think it's the thing I didn't deserve when we were young," she said, "and I think I've been trying to find my way back to it ever since." I didn't say anything. but I didn't pick up the plant either, and she noticed. The smallest breath of relief crossed her face. Fragile and real and nothing like the woman who had closed that office door and asked if I remembered her. I did remember her, but I was beginning to think I hadn't known her at all. The resignation letter never reached the board. Sophia took it back to her office, and I watched through the glass partition as she sat at her desk, held it for a long moment, and then placed it in her drawer instead of the outgoing tray. She looked up and caught me watching. Neither of us looked away immediately. That meant something. I just didn't know yet how much. What followed was not a fairy tale. I want to be honest about that. There were still 2 weeks of careful, documented interactions. Still the formal memo sitting in my drawer like a stone. Still Marcus Webb moving through the office with that particular brand of quiet confidence that belongs to people who believe they have already won. But Sophia was moving too. Quietly, methodically, with the same precision she had applied to 11 years of careful approved decisions. Except this time she was applying it to dismantling something instead of building it. I learned later what she had done in those 2 weeks. She had requested an independent audit of the shared server access logs. She had personally cross-referenced the timestamps against the building's after-hours entry records. She had done it alone, after hours, without involving the board or the IT department, because she understood that the moment she involved an institution, she gave the institution the power to control the outcome. She found what she was looking for on a Wednesday evening. Marcus Webb's senior clearance credentials had accessed the Henderson project files at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. 40 minutes after the last recorded exit from the building, and 3 hours before the altered version appeared on the shared server the following morning. The board meeting happened on a Thursday. I was not invited, but Janet, who had seen everything and forgotten nothing, texted me 2 words at approximately 11:15 a.m. She's speaking. I sat at my desk and stared at those 2 words and felt something move through me that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. Something more durable. By noon, Marcus Webb had been escorted from the building by HR and a representative from the legal department. He carried a box. He did not look in my direction as he passed, but the careful, composed smile was gone entirely. What replaced it was something small and collapsed that I almost felt sorry for. Almost. Sophia found me at my desk that afternoon. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat in the chair beside my desk, the same chair she had pulled up weeks ago when she decided to stay, and looked at the photograph of my father on the corner of my desk. "He looks kind," she said. "He was the kindest man I ever knew," I said. "He also pressed my school shirts every evening so I'd walk in with my head up." She was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone who understood something most people don't." "What's that?" "That dignity isn't something the world gives you." She looked at me. "It's something you decide." I looked back at her, and right there, not in a grand moment, not with music or perfect lighting, I understood that I loved her. Not despite everything. Not as some complicated redemption story. Just cleanly, completely, in the way you recognize something that was always true even before you had the language for it. "What happens now?" I asked. She reached over and straightened the photograph of my father slightly, a small, careful gesture that undid me more than any grand declaration could have. "Now," she said quietly, "we take it one honest day at a time. I kept the plant. I tend it every morning before the office fills up, before the emails begin, before the world requires anything from either of us. And sometimes when the floor is still quiet and the coffee appears beside my keyboard without explanation, I look up and find her already looking. We don't perform for each other. We never have to. If this story stayed with you, if it reminded you that some things are worth the wait, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. There are more stories coming that I think you'll want to be here for.